Welcome back to another edition of Political Breakfast here on WABE. Here today, filling in for Tharon Johnson is Saba Long, graciously stepping in as usual. Our strategist Brian Robinson is here as well. Happy Monday to both of you. A chilly fall-like Monday here in Atlanta, isn't it?
Everybody's here in their pullovers.
Like
yeah, it's nice.
Yeah, really feeling like fall today. Yeah.
I miss summer.
Yeah, you miss it already?
Oh, already. I already miss it.
I love autumn. It's my favorite time of year.
Oh, me too,
I like
Lisa.
fall fashion.
Yeah.
Fall fashion is great, but summer weather is better.
But I have a golden retriever and a corgi, both of which have British Isles origin. And so for them, they're like, finally, thank you, Jesus. I'm going to go roll in the cold grass and just sunbathe in 45-degree weather. They're just, I mean, they are.
They love it.
There's a little pep in their step this morning. They are super excited.
Yeah, that breeze does something to dogs out there, doesn't it?
Yeah. Well, and I can't, you can't walk a golden retriever when it's 85. He'll just fall over and die, right? It's just too hot.
Yeah. Well, it was perfect weather for what? All the protesters over the weekend. Thousands and thousands of the pro-King protesters were out in force over the weekend.
Yeah, they got some great weather for their protest. And I saw some. I was taking my daughter to her soccer game before heading over to Athens for the Ole Miss Georgia game, and saw a bunch of protesters. I'd say, a bunch. I mean, maybe a couple hundred, maybe a little less, along Peachtree Road, just on the Brookhaven side of the Brookhaven, Atlanta city limit sign. One thing that was a note to me, and I'd be interested to see pictures of some of the other protests, it was all white. But, I mean, there may have been some diversity, but it looked like, just from driving by, an all white and almost all over 65 crowd there along Peachtree Road. Now, granted, this was set up right in front of a massive senior living facility, and I don't know if there is a correlation there, but it seemed to be a very older and much wider crowd than what I would have anticipated. Saw something very similar in Athens going along the loop, going under a bridge. There were a bunch of protesters on the bridge there. I don't know how many, couldn't really tell from my vantage point, but a significant number with signs and all that kind of stuff. So I don't know if what I saw was representative of what was at the Civic Center where Warnock spoke, but that's what I saw where I was.
Very diverse crowd, wouldn't you say, Saba, downtown?
It was a little more diverse, but since Trump has been in office in the second term, overwhelmingly the protests have been more white than black, in particular. That doesn't mean that black folks aren't showing up, but I know certainly a lot of black women I talk to who say they are part of the 92%. Have said they are leaving the protests to others. They made their voices heard in November of 2024, and they feel the onus is on others, I think in particular white folks, to step up and say that they are not okay with what's happening. I think it's important to remember why the No Kings protests took place. It's really a conversation that we're having nationally about presidential power, about the role of government, and this general question around what does resistance look like. I think it's also important to note that these protests were peaceful in nature, and there's a lot of conversation about what are the rights of American citizens, and is it appropriate to protest your government, and what does that look like? I think a lot of the folks who had negative things to say about the No Kings protest, I can only imagine what they would have said about protests in the 50s and 60s.
It wasn't.
Yeah, a lot of people are wondering. No, go ahead.
Well, you're talking about the people protesting peacefully, and that certainly is what I saw. I didn't see anything that was concerning or scary to me. And my daughter was in the car, and it was a teachable moment. It was great. And I kind of got a chance to talk to a 9-year-old about the First Amendment. And I said, we're Republicans. That's not our team over there. But, they're out there expressing their opinions, and they don't like Donald Trump. These people over here, they don't like Donald Trump, and they have every right to go and say that. And even though we don't agree with everything that they're saying or their politics, we as Americans have to support their right to go and do that. So I appreciated the teachable moment there for my daughter. And when my mom was taking my daughter back home, Quinn said, little mama, you might want to take a different route. There's a bunch of Democrats out there in the road blocking traffic.
And there were some frogs out there too, some inflatables, trying to, underscoring the point that they are peaceful and they're not these, extremists and violent protesters as some have been labeled as well. But they were out in force and like you said, Saba, very, very peaceful and it brought out Stacey Abrams. What does that mean? Does that mean anything else? Was she out there just to make a point, or was she out there to make a political statement as well?
Well, she's been talking a lot about the rise of authoritarianism in the United States, and so this was the perfect platform for her to continue that conversation. I think also folks saw this as an opportunity to really rally Democrats. We've got statewide elections. Democrats have statewide elections in Georgia. There's really a national conversation happening about who are the Democratic leaders that are going to step up and be a counter to the Trump administration. And a lot of Democrats are not happy with Hakeem Jeffries, with Chuck Schumer in Washington. And I think Stacey Abrams sees herself as one of the Democrats who will speak truth to power and give the party generally a different alternative and be seen as more of a fighter. I think a lot of folks in the Democratic Party are concerned that their leaders are not a real counter, and I think Stacey can certainly play that role.
But I think you raise an interesting point there, and they're mad with Hakeem Jeffries and Chuck Schumer because they're in the minority and only so much they can do. The fact of the matter is, they want their leadership to do what they're accusing the Republicans of doing, of being authoritarian. That's what they want. That's what, they do not want to play by the rules of democracy either. And that's going to be a problem on both sides. Both bases have unrealistic views of what their leadership or what their elected representatives can do once elected, whether they are in the majority or in the minority. And they want everything to go their way, and that's not how it works in a democracy. And both sides are going to their corners on this, and that's got us to where we are now. One thing that I don't think Democrats who get stovepiped media, who are fed affirming viewpoints in the media they consume, just as conservatives do. I'm not saying that this is one side or the other is different, but Republicans, when a lot of the commentary I saw over the weekend was about the democratic authoritarianism that we saw around COVID. Vaccine mandates, you get fired, keeping schools closed and hurting a generation of children much, much longer than we should have. The censorship of people on social media, the deplatforming of people on social media who in the arc of time were proven to be not necessarily crazy. Some of the stuff they were saying was legitimate. So Republicans have a lot of the same complaints. And one thing that I don't think that is breaking through here is the average voter is not caught up in philosophical arguments. And the Democrats are making this democracy argument. Kamala Harris made the democracy argument in the 24 election. And I said right here on Political Breakfast, this is a mistake. The issue is inflation and immigration, and they're talking about this gauzy, highfalutin thought. And democracy is important to me. I understood what they were saying, but it wasn't moving the needle. And I don't know that this no monarchy thing is really going to move the needle with average voters either. Working class voters, particularly the ones feeling the squeeze by inflation, the cost of living, they're going to be very sensitive to an economic argument, not to a philosophical argument. And that I do kind of question the utilitarian nature of this message. I understand that it may be all they have. They just feel a pent-up need to go and discuss this, to go and raise their voices and be anti-Trump. I get it. They have that right to do it. But the problem that Democrats have is they do not have any other unifying message other than anti-Trump rhetoric. That is what brings them together. They don't have a plan for the economy. They don't have a plan that Americans believe in for national security and social issues. That's the problem that Democrats face. Until Americans feel like Trump is to blame for a bad economy, Democrats are going to have a hard time messaging in a way that breaks through.
Is that true, Saba? Is that sound? How sound is that?
So here's where I will agree with Brian that the conversation of democracy only works when you have an educated population. When people understand their history, they fundamentally understand why this democracy conversation is important. I mean, we talk a lot about the three branches of government. The fact of the matter is Congress has ceded its power. The courts, to some extent, are ceding their power. And so there is a very clear, I mean, there are many examples to show where the president has said, I am going to do what I want to do, and it's up to you to try to stop me, but I'm going to make it very difficult for you to do so. I mean, we can talk about the use of the United States military. We can talk about removing independence of agencies like the FCC. We can talk about unilateral military strikes on potential drug boats. We can talk about, there are a number of things, right? Trump floating a trial balloon of invoking the Insurrection Act. There are a number of things that even some Republicans have said, hold on, this is a bridge too far. And the No Kings protest should not be an anti-Trump protest, or this even notion of the No Kings protest being against Trump. It's not about Trump. It's about whoever is in that seat that abuses the power of the presidency. So if Biden did it, people talked about things that they didn't agree with Biden. If the next president does it, there should be a No Kings protest for that president as well. So when Americans see military, National Guard, others in their cities, that's cause for alarm, right? When you have a president that says, I'm considering invoking the Insurrection Act, that should raise the eyebrows of anyone. Now, to the second part of Brian's point around cost of living, there is a real issue there. And that's something that Republicans also have not shown that they have the policies put forth to address, right? There, if you really want Trump to be a strong man, that's an area where I think if he focused his energy on saying, I'm going to use the power of the presidency to address the cost of living for everyday Americans in a real way, and doing that does not mean that I'm vilifying other groups of people, I think he would have a lot of bipartisan support in doing that. But the fact of the matter is that is not occurring. Right now, the government is shut down over a conversation about healthcare costs. We know in Georgia alone, thousands and thousands, if not millions of Georgians are going to see their premiums double, possibly triple. Republicans have had more than a decade to have a real answer to the Affordable Care Act, and they haven't put forth a plan, right? So the question is, if you look at the key costs for a family, it's health care, which oftentimes in the United States, it's tied to your employer, unless you have something like the Affordable Care Act, and then housing. So what are we doing to address the key issues that everyday Americans are facing?
So then these protests are warranted then? You're saying they're warranted?
Well, the No Kings protest isn't necessarily, I don't see about the cost of living, it's about power. So there's a question of, to what extent do you protest and push back on what you see as an erosion of democratic norms? And then parallel to that, to what extent are you protesting the cost of living and the lack of real leadership across the aisle on addressing these key issues?
So
Brian, I've got you stumped.
So, yeah, but when President Trump poo-poos this, you say what?
It's funny you say poo-poos this, because he literally put out an AI video of him in a fighter jet dumping bombs of excrement on top of protesters.
Yeah.
So I don't know if you were meaning to speak literally to that, but that is literally what they put out over the weekend. Look, I think this debate and protests are a healthy part of democracy. I think the fact that these protests went forward and there was not a federal response, there was not Trump out there sending National Guards out on protesters, or Republicans, creating scenarios, claiming violence by these protesters. I think that that's a good sign that our democracy remains healthy. So that's a nice takeaway from all of this. They got to have their say. It's great. Like all these issues that we're talking about are legitimate issues. The National Guard thing, I think there are a lot of conservatives who would have concerns about the federal state division of power there and who has the authority to put troops into the streets of American cities. I think it's a difficult argument to make for Democrats because in many of those cities that Trump is talking about, there have been long-term crime problems. People do feel unsafe. There are high levels of homicides, high levels of crime, a fleeing of retail because of the unsustainability of staying open when there's not enough enforcement against shoplifting, etc. So I think that that gets really tricky because then Trump's talking about your life and Democrats are talking about philosophy. And it's a very difficult topic for them to get into and win.
But there's a way to go about doing that, right? I mean, if you look at Chicago, if you look at even right here in Atlanta, right, there are sound policies that both cities are putting forth to address crime. And part of that is prevention, right? So crime prevention is not solely more cops on the street, rather that's police or National Guard. Like that is not, there's an amount of deterrence that happens because you've got cops on the street for sure. But if you look at why are people committing crimes? Are the kids in school? Are they being educated? Does the family have a sound support system? Are their mental health concerns being taken care of? Like address those key issues first, and you're going to see a drop in crime. Like there is study after study that shows this. And so there is an opportunity for the federal government to say, we are going to work with cities and states to address this in a meaningful way. But what we have seen has not worked. It just fundamentally has not. I cannot imagine what the reaction would be on the right if a Democratic president said, I'm going to put the National Guard in insert Republican county, Republican city. There would be complete and utter outrage. And and I know that privately Republicans are saying things, but publicly they are not. And again, that is why the No Kings protest took place, because folks know this is not normal behavior.
I think part of the reason why there hasn't been a bigger blowback on it is because where the National Guard has been deployed, it hasn't been a big in-your-face deployment. I kept hearing DC media folks being like, yeah, they were here for a few days. I haven't really seen them since. So I think that's part of it, is that they haven't bigfooted this anywhere. And look, if the stats will bear out Trump's rhetoric, he says, I put people in here and crime disappeared. The people who live there aren't fooled. You can't tell people that inflation isn't bad and that the cost of living is sustainable if it doesn't match what they're seeing and feeling. And the same is true of crime. You can't tell them that crime is taken care of, that the streets are safe, because people won't believe that unless they are living it and experiencing it. So those are two issues that are very much real life in the streets issues. And you can't fool people. They know. They live it.
I was talking to someone from Chicago who was in town this weekend for Morehouse Homecoming, and business guy, and he said the National Guard in Chicago are in a very specific part of town. It's not across the city.
Right.
It's just one concentrated area.
Which backs up what I'm saying.
Yes, to your point. I think part of the challenge in this conversation is the media portrayal and then the political rhetoric, right? I mean, this reminds me of it was some protest in Atlanta, I can't remember which one, and there was one cop car that was burning. And that became the national image on Fox News and otherwise, and Atlanta has fallen kind of rhetoric. And I'm like, this is concentrated in one block, maybe 2 blocks of the city, but it's being perceived and shown as Atlanta is on fire, and that was not the case.
Well, yeah.
Right. Well, and I had the same. I was at a conference with a guy from Chicago who does what I do for a living, but it must be hard being a Republican public affairs guy in Chicago. That must be a lonely experience. But I said, look, I'm curious to get your perspective as somebody who lives in the city of Chicago, kind of near downtown, in one of those nice neighborhoods there around the park and near the shore. When I go to Chicago, I think it's a lovely city. It is. I've always felt safe. I really enjoy the cultural amenities. The hotels are nice. The restaurants are great. I love Chicago. I think it's a very livable city. And he said it has changed. And he goes, where I live, I do hear gunfire at night, and it wasn't always like that. And so this was one example of one person who lives there. Granted, he's a white guy. He's a Republican. Probably lives in a pretty nice neighborhood. But he was saying in his lived experience and what he sees every day, it has gotten worse. And that makes Trump's job of selling this a lot easier because people feel under siege. And when they feel under siege, they are open and willing to accept things that they wouldn't accept in our democracy if they didn't feel unsafe.
Under siege, that's an interesting phrase.
It's the kind of phrase that Trump uses to great effect.
Stacey Abrams, I want to bring her up again.
Yeah.
As I always do. Do we think we're going to see her run for governor? Are we going to see her run for something soon? I don't know. I just have that feeling. I don't know. I have that feeling. Is that worth talking about?
I would be shocked. I do think it's worth talking about because she is such a larger-than-life figure in Georgia politics, but also nationally. She matters. She's able to fundraise significantly. She's got rhetorical, performative talent that is of note and useful. I think the ship has sailed as far as running for governor. You don't run a third time. You just don't do it. And I'll say this. There is no one running for office right now who, of course, has her name ID, so it's not really a fair comparison. But there is no one who attracts the vitriol that she does from so many Georgians. I think Republicans over these cycles have grown to really dislike her, like they did Hillary Clinton, right? She just hits a certain button, and I don't know what it is, and I'm not going to commentate on that, but I can tell you in what I see online, what I hear in conversations, there's just a deep well of dislike for her, and I think that seeps into independence. And here's the thing, here's the deadly thing for her, is that too many Democrats in Georgia are ready to move on, right? We appreciate what you did. We like you, but it's time for somebody else to have a chance. And I think that there's some Stacey fatigue amongst Democrats because they've been through it. And I think that there is some underlying undercurrent that she ruled the party with such an iron fist. She was able to pick people to run for other offices, like picking B. Wynn, for example, to be the Secretary of State nominee in 2022, that people resented it. When you had that much control over a group for a period of time, other people with ambitions, people who feel like they should have a shot, that they have something to offer, there begins to be resentment against your organization. And some of those people in Georgia Democrat politics who resent her are fairly powerful in their own right. You know, Keisha Lance Bottoms was certainly in a different divide of the Democratic Party than Stacey Abrams. I would say Keisha Lance Bottoms is also somebody who's going to face some of the same headwinds as Stacey Abrams as far as a brand that is well known and will be very difficult to overcome in a 2026 election.
Saba, I don't know. Is she that hated?
I think Stacey does have high negatives. If you're polling, generally when you're polling a candidate, you want to see, how do voters perceive them in a positive or negative light. And I do think that she has high negatives. But
The fave
regardless
unfave.
of that,
The fave unfave.
yes, exactly. I don't think she's going to run. We've talked about, I think Brian and I have been on the show before talking about the likelihood of a third run. I don't think she will. I think, the Democratic primary is probably contested enough at this point. And I just don't see her doing that. Now, the question might be, will she put her thumb on the scale? And when does that occur, right? And then the other question is, now that New Georgia Project is shut down, to what extent does she put up another organization or back another organization to do voter turnout work in 2026? And that's really, if I were
that's
the
her
head
strength
of,
right now.
Yeah, if I were the head of DPG, Democratic Party of Georgia, that's where I would be putting her to work, right? So help us boost turnout, help us bring independents to our side, help us make the clear contrast between Democratic policies and Republican policies. Not running for a third chance at this. I just don't think that that's in the cards.
And ironically for her is I do think 2026, the atmosphere is the best for a Democrat to win since 2018 in Georgia. 2022 wasn't going to matter. I mean, Biden in the White House, inflation, immigration out of control, all of that. No Democrat was going to win in Georgia in that atmosphere. 2018 was one that was propitious for Democrats. There was a real shot there. And 2026, with Trump back in the White House in a midterm, kind of presents some of the same atmosphere for Democrats. So I can see why Stacey's going to think long and hard about it. But I think she shot that second shot in 2022, and that kind of ended it. Here's the other thing for Democrats. Necessity. Isn't necessity is the mother of invention? And there is not as much necessity. There was a time when Democrats had no hold on power in Georgia, where it was very difficult to fundraise to run a campaign in state. Stacey was able to go out of state, build a national fundraising base, bring in tens of millions and then hundreds of millions of dollars into Georgia to fight the Democratic cause. In 2026, Democrats don't need her. There's going to be $250 million spent from sources around the country for Jon Ossoff. So the turnout machine that's going to help Democrats down ballot is going to be driven at the top of the ballot. And yes, the U.S. Senate race is above the governor's race on our ballot. And they're not going to need a governor to raise $300 million, $200 million, right? Because there's already going to be this get out the vote effort funded by national Dems to reelect Jon Ossoff. So in many ways, Ossoff, not Stacey Abrams, will be the horse that pulls the cart for Democrats in 2026.
Well, we have to say Stacey Abrams still has her fans who believe that she still has some political strength in her. Turning to the Senate race, though, is the President, Donald Trump, any closer to making an endorsement, do you think? I know you chatted a little bit about that last week, Brian. You said he's paying very close attention. Is he any closer to making an endorsement? Or will he? Will he or will he not?
I don't think he will right now or anytime soon. When I talk to friends in the White House, they point out that they did endorse Burt Jones, long-standing relationship there. But they haven't been doing that around the country, weighing in this early. So I think Trump personally likes the fact that the three top Republicans are out there competing for his affections. They're all going to stay in line because no one wants to deviate from Trump and run the risk of giving the endorsement to someone else or not getting it for themselves. So it's a great tool that Trump has to make sure that everybody kind of stays in line with what he wants, because two of them are members of Congress. Another one is attached to Governor Kemp, who, Trump would love to kind of keep in line to some degree or have a check on. So for those reasons, it makes a lot of strategic sense for Trump to wait. And we just saw in the last week the fundraising reports come out, and you saw Mike Collins and Derek Dooley with very similar numbers. There's nobody who came out and just stomped the field, right? It's very close to par. And we're seeing a bunch of nattering and back and forth between the Collins and Dooley campaigns about who really raised more. The Collins campaign put out a number. The Dooley campaign go, oh, there's some funny math here. You're adding in some stuff that doesn't really count. That can't go towards your campaign. You said you weren't going to self-fund, and there's $65,000 from Mike Collins in there. So you're seeing some back and forth over that. But it just goes to show you how they're going to fight over every inch, because in their minds, every inch matters when trying to get Trump's attention, Trump's affection, Trump's endorsement.
He's loving it, isn't he, Saba?
Oh, yeah, I was just on the phone with Trump this weekend.
Giving a report from the No Kings protest.
That's right. Yeah, I mean, we all know the type of person that Trump is, and he is certainly someone that likes you to kiss the ring. Gosh, does that sound like a king? No, okay. So yeah, if I were him, I would hold out. He doesn't need to put his thumb on the scale yet. This is still really early. The only people paying attention to the Senate race right now are folks like us, the real political nerds. And
we love you, political nerds out there listening to Political Breakfast.
That's right.
God bless you. I'm glad y'all care about this first race.
I think the question will be, does a Trump endorsement help or hurt? I mean, we're in October. We're in October, and we don't know what the political landscape is going to look like by March or April.
Wow.
It could be a very different world. We don't know yet.
It ain't gonna be a very different world in a primary, though. When it comes to primary electorate in Georgia, or any state in the country for that matter, for Republicans, the Trump endorsement is a net positive.
To get out of the primary, but the question is, who gets out of the primary and can they actually win the general, which is also a question Democrats are asking themselves as well.
100%. And you will see in Brian Robinson communications, whether on his social media or, I don't know why I'm speaking to the third person.
All right.
What am I doing? Because I'm a king. Because the royal we here. When I can talk about the next year, I focus a lot on Republicans needing to look at electability and who are the deciders in Georgia. The Kemp Warnock voters in 2022, for example, going to pick who's going to be acceptable to them. I think both sides need to be focused like a laser on that issue. I don't know. Again, a recurring debate here between me and Tharon is, are voters strategic like that? We'll see. I think it's a great test case in Georgia in 2022. So electability is going to be huge. And I don't think that the Trump endorsement hurts you in a general, because you wear Donald Trump, whether you have his endorsement or not, if there's an R behind your name in a general election. So you're going to be impacted regardless by the atmosphere around Trump. Where is his approval rating? Is it in the high 40s? Is it in the low 40s? Because, buddy, that is where this is made. If it's high 40s, you are doing great. You are probably going to win. If it's low 40s, start planning for alternate employment in 2027.
All right.
Yeah, we'll see.
Well, we'll end it there. Some good chat today. Again, Saba, thank you so much for always stepping up and stepping in, and we'll do it again soon.
Can we also pray for a Falcons win next week?
Oh, my gosh. I'm glad I went to bed after the third quarter.
They have a good week, then they have a bad week.
Yes.
A good week, then they have a bad week.
They look
and Atlanta
like
United.
They look like magic on Monday night. And that was my one game of the year I went to, was that. Man, I picked the right one. I will say, though, one thing that I was with a significant chamber president over the weekend, and I was like, we got to do something about getting to Mercedes-Benz Stadium. It took me 90 minutes to get from Brookhaven to the stadium on Monday.
Oh, really?
And Waze is taking, because all that Centennial Yards is getting built.
Yeah.
So Waze is taking you down streets that are barricaded. What?
There's this thing called MARTA, and there is a MARTA station in Brookhaven.
That's true. That's true. Look.
Picture Marta. Can you picture Brian on Marta?
You see me on Marta, I usually have a suitcase. That's where I'm heading, usually. Not necessarily to the stadium.
To Cancun?
Yeah.
Pray for our Falcons. They can do it.